7:21 in the morning. The Barents Sea. A Russian Tu-160 strategic bomber was already cutting through the freezing mist at 30,000 feet. This was not a routine training flight. The bomber was broadcasting a transponder code reserved for active combat sorties. In the hardened bunkers of NATO Northern Command, the digital screens turned red. An aircraft designed for nuclear standoff was flying a direct line toward the Norwegian coast. Why a veteran Russian pilot would trigger a global alert over empty water was a question NATO command could not answer. Inside the cockpit of the Russian bomber, the pilot maintained a steady hand. Major Viktor Volkov looked at his primary flight display. The air was thin and crystal clear at this altitude. Below him, the dark water of the Arctic Ocean was hidden by a thick layer of gray clouds. He was 400 miles from his release point. His orders were absolute. He was to test the reaction time of the newest Western defenses, but his sensors were already showing something he did not expect. A ghost signal was dancing on his radar. It was there for a second. Then, it was gone. 7:25 in the morning. Evenes Air Base, Norway. Two F-35 Lightning fighters ignited their afterburners. The roar of the engines shattered the morning silence of the fjords. Leading the flight was Captain Sarah Miller. Her call sign was Valkyrie 11. She pulled the stick back and felt the G-force press her into the seat. Her mission was a quick reaction alert intercept. Usually, these encounters were professional and predictable. They would fly alongside the Russian planes, they would take photos, they would wave. Today felt different. The data link in her helmet was pulsing with urgent priority symbols. The controller at the Air Operations Center spoke into her headset. Valkyrie 11. Target is a single Tupolev 160, bearing 010. Speed is Mach 0.9. He is not responding to international hailing frequencies. Sarah adjusted her oxygen mask. Copy. I am climbing to 35,000 feet. My wingman is in trail. We will have eyes on the target in 3 minutes. The controller responded. Be advised. The target is categorized as a hostile track. Rules of engagement are yellow. Do not arm weapons unless fired upon. 7:28 in the morning. The F-35 surged through a bank of high-altitude clouds. Sarah saw the massive white shape of the Tupolev 160. It was a beautiful and terrifying machine. The Russian pilot was not turning. He was not slowing down. Sarah moved her fighter into a position off the left wing of the bomber. She could see the pilot clearly. Major Volkov did not look at her. He was staring straight ahead. Suddenly, the master caution light in Sarah's cockpit flashed yellow. Her synthetic aperture radar was struggling to maintain a lock. The massive bomber seemed to shimmer on her display. It was as if the aircraft was physically vibrating at a frequency the radar could not process. Sarah spoke to her wingman. Valkyrie 12. Are you seeing this? My radar is losing track integrity. Her wingman's voice came through the radio. Confirmed. My systems are cycling. It looks like a software glitch. But he is right in front of us. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:31 in the morning, high above the Barents Sea. Captain Sarah Miller pulled her F-35 closer to the massive wing of the Russian bomber. She was now within 50 meters of the white fuselage. The sun reflected off the polished metal of the Tupolev 160. She tilted her wings to signal the other pilot. Usually, this would result in a hand signal or a slight adjustment in course. Today, the Russian pilot remained motionless. He was staring directly at his instrument panel. Sarah noticed something unusual. The control surfaces on the bomber were twitching. The flaps and ailerons were moving in small, rapid cycles that did not match the steady flight path. Sarah spoke to her wingman. Valkyrie 12. Stay at my 6 o'clock. His aircraft is behaving erratically. I am seeing high-frequency vibration on his tail section. Her wingman responded. Copy. My sensors are picking up a localized electromagnetic field. It is centered on the bomber. It is off the charts. My radar is completely blind within 2 miles of his position. 7:34 in the morning. Inside the Russian cockpit, Major Viktor Volkov was fighting his aircraft. The flight stick felt like it was welded in place. He pulled back with both hands, but the bomber continued its steady descent toward 30,000 feet. His digital displays were a mess of shifting symbols. The navigation computer showed his position was in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Then it showed he was over the North Pole. He knew his systems were being compromised. Volkov spoke into his radio. "Control. This is Bear 6-1. My flight systems are non-responsive. I have a total loss of digital integrity. The Western fighters are on my wing. I cannot signal them. My landing gear is cycling without input." The Russian controller at Severomorsk responded. "Bear 6-1. We see the anomaly on our ground-based tracking. Be advised, you are entering a restricted sector. If you do not change course, you will trigger the automated defense network of the Northern Fleet." Volkov's voice was calm but strained. "The aircraft is flying itself. 7:36 in the morning. The Combined Air Operations Center." In the bunker at Uedom, Germany, the atmosphere was electric. General Marcus Thorn watched the live feed from the Norwegian radar stations. The Russian bomber was now inside the outer identification zone. It was heading straight for a sensitive NATO undersea sensor array. On the big screen, a red box appeared around the bomber. The system had automatically designated the track as a hostile intercept target. A tactical officer turned to the general. "Sir, the automated engagement system is requesting authorization. The bomber has opened its internal weapons bay. Repeat, the weapons bay is open." General Thorne leaned forward. "He is within 60 miles of the coast. Why would he open the bay now?" The officer replied. "Thermal sensors show heat signatures consistent with cruise missile initialization. He is preparing to launch." Inside her cockpit, Sarah Miller saw the bay doors on the belly of the Tupolev slide open. It was a slow and mechanical process. She felt a chill go down her spine. She jumped from a yellow warning to a red combat lock. The computer voice in her ear was steady and cold. "Target acquired. Missile solution ready. Authorize engagement." Sarah reached for the master arm switch. Her hand stopped. He had turned his head. For the first time, he was looking directly at her. He was holding both of his hands up, away from the flight controls. He was showing her he was not the one in control. Then, the first missile left the rail of her F-35 without her command. 7:38 in the morning. Over the Barents Sea, the Meteor missile dropped from the internal weapons bay of the F-35. Its solid fuel motor ignited with a brilliant white flash. Captain Sarah Miller felt the physical jolt through her flight suit. The cockpit was filled with the sharp scent of ozone. She had not pulled the trigger. She had not authorized the launch. The weapon was now live and hunting the largest target in its field of view. The Tupolev 160 was less than 2 miles away. At these speeds, the time to impact was measured in heartbeats. Sarah spoke into her radio. Her voice was an octave higher than usual. "Control. This is Valkyrie 1-1. I have an uncommanded weapon release. Repeat. Uncommanded launch. I am attempting to transmit a self-destruct code. My systems are not responding," the controller at the Air Operations Center shouted over the channel. "Valkyrie 1-1. Confirm you did not engage. We are seeing a missile in the air. This is a blue-on-blue incident. Break away. Break away now." "I cannot break away," Sarah replied. "The flight computer has locked my controls. I am slave to the missile track." 7:39 in the morning. Northern Fleet Command, Severomorsk. The Russian radar technicians saw the launch in real time. A small, high-speed contact had separated from the NATO fighter and was accelerating toward the Tupolev. The room exploded into a frenzy of activity. This was the nightmare scenario every officer had trained for. An unprovoked attack on a strategic asset. The automated systems on the ground reacted instantly. A battery of S-400 surface-to-air missiles turned their launchers toward the horizon. The Russian commander slammed his fist on the console. "Signal the Northern Fleet. Establish a combat air patrol immediately. If that bomber is hit, we are at war. Target the NATO fighters." A technician looked up, his face pale. "Sir, the Tupolev is not deploying countermeasures. Major Volkov is reporting a total systems failure. He is a sitting duck." 7:40 in the morning. Inside the Russian cockpit, Major Volkov watched the white smoke trail of the Meteor missile in his rearview mirror. It was a beautiful, deadly line cutting through the blue sky. He pushed the button for the chaff and flare dispensers. He did it again. Nothing happened. He grabbed the emergency manual release for the flares. The lever would not budge. He looked at the NATO fighter off his wing. He could see Sarah Miller's helmet. Volkov spoke into his internal recorder. He wanted someone to know the truth. This is Major Volkov. The Western pilot is not the aggressor. Her aircraft is behaving like mine. We are being manipulated by an external force. The missile is 3 kilometers out. I am prepared for impact. Tell my family I did my duty. 7:41 in the morning. The Meteor missile was now in its terminal phase. Its active radar seeker was locked onto the center mass of the Russian bomber. It was traveling at 4 times the speed of sound. Sarah Miller watched the distance closing on her helmet display. 2,000 meters. 1,000 meters. 500 meters. She closed her eyes. She waited for the explosion that would end the peace of the world. The weapon reached its terminal phase. The end was seconds away. 7:42 in the morning. Above the frozen Barents Sea. The Meteor missile was less than 200 meters from the white belly of the Russian bomber. Its proximity fuse was active. Its warhead was primed to shred the aircraft with a cloud of high-velocity fragments. The missile did not detonate. It did not fly past the target. It performed a maneuver that defied every law of aerodynamics and structural engineering. The weapon pulled a 60G turn in a fraction of a second. It did not lose velocity. It accelerated. It was no longer hunting the Russian bomber. It was tracking the heat signature of the F-35 that had launched it. Captain Sarah Miller stared at her tactical display. The red diamond representing the missile had flipped. It was now moving in the opposite direction. It was coming straight for her cockpit. Her head snapped to the left. She saw the white streak of the missile exhaust curving through the air like a lethal ribbon. It was a physical impossibility. No human-made interceptor could reverse its vector without shattering. Sarah spoke into her radio. Her voice was sharp with adrenaline. Control. The missile has turned. Repeat. The weapon has performed a 180-degree reversal. It is tracking me. I am the target. The controller at the Air Operations Center sounded breathless. Valkyrie 1-1. That is not possible. The Meteor does not have the turn radius for a pursuit reversal. Check your sensor integrity, Sarah shouted back. I am looking at it. It is closing. 3 miles. 2 miles. My flares are not firing. I have no flight control. I am slaved to the track. I have no flight control. I am slave to the track. 7:42 and 30 seconds in the morning. Inside the Russian bomber, Major Viktor Volkov watched the missile depart. He had been bracing for the impact that would end his life. Now he was a witness to a miracle. He saw the white trail arc away from his wing. He saw the weapon head directly back toward the NATO fighter. His radar screen showed the missile speed increasing to Mach 5.0. That was faster than the weapon was designed to fly at this altitude. Volkov keyed his radio. He used the international emergency frequency. Valkyrie. Your weapon is rogue. Brake left. You must brake left now. Sarah Miller responded on the same channel. Her voice was thin and full of static. I cannot. My stick is dead. The aircraft is flying a straight line. I am locked out of the system. I am a passenger. 7:43 in the morning. The distance between the F-35 and the rogue missile was now less than 5,000 meters. In the combined Air Operations Center in Germany, every screen showed the same nightmare. A NATO missile was about to destroy a NATO fighter in front of a Russian strategic bomber. The geopolitical fallout would be catastrophic. The human cost would be immediate. General Thorne stood over his lead technician. Kill it. Send the destruct sequence again. Use the emergency satellite override. Burn the logic boards if you have to. The technician typed furiously. Sir, the missile is rejecting the code. It is returning a message. It says, Invalid command authority. It is not recognizing our encryption keys. It is as if the missile belongs to someone else now. Thorn leaned on the table. Thorn leaned on the table. Then who is controlling it? In the sky, the white streak grew larger in Sarah's canopy. The missile was a narrow silver needle pointed at her heart. She could see the guidance fins twitching. It was making micro-adjustments with surgical precision. She was out of time. She was out of options. She gripped the ejection handle with both hands. She pulled with all her strength. Nothing happened. The canopy remained sealed. The seat remained bolted to the floor. The missile reached the terminal phase of its new flight path. Sarah closed her eyes and waited for the white light. The air around the two aircraft began to hum with a low, pulsing frequency. 7:44 in the morning, high above the Barents Sea. The Meteor missile reached the 0 point. It was exactly 300 meters above the surface of the ocean. It was positioned at the precise geometric center between the F-35 and the Tu-160. There was no impact. There was no sound of tearing metal. Instead, there was a flash of light that was not orange or red. It was a brilliant, clinical blue. It looked like a spark from a high-voltage line, magnified 1,000 times. The shockwave hit both aircraft simultaneously. It was not a wall of air. It was a ripple in the electromagnetic spectrum. Inside the F-35, every digital display went black. The cockpit lights flickered and died. The hum of the cooling fans stopped. For a terrifying 3 seconds, Captain Sarah Miller was flying a $50 million glider. Her helmet-mounted display was dark. The world outside was a silent, blue-tinted blur. 300 feet away, the Russian bomber groaned. The massive airframe vibrated, as if it had been struck by a giant hammer. Major Volkov felt the control yoke go limp in his hands. His 4 engines did not flame out, but they settled into a low, steady idle that he could not adjust. The roar of the jet wash was replaced by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He looked out his side window. He saw the American fighter. It was drifting. It was banking slowly to the left, caught in the wake of the explosion. 7:45 in the morning. The blue light faded, leaving purple streaks in the vision of both pilots. Sarah Miller fumbled for the manual battery override. She flipped the guarded switch. One by one, her backup instruments crawled back to life. The standby horizon leveled out. The small, analog fuel gauge showed she still had a mission-capable load, but her tactical computer was gone. The radar was dead. The radio emitted nothing but a steady, rhythmic pulse. It sounded like a heartbeat. Sarah looked to her left. The Russian bomber was still there. It was no longer a threat. It was a ghost. The weapons bay doors were still open, but the interior was dark. The cruise missiles inside were inert. She keyed her radio, hoping the short-range frequency still worked. Valkyrie 1-2. Do you read? Any NATO station. This is Valkyrie 1. I have had a weapon detonation. I am blind. Status check. There was no answer, only the heartbeat. Thump. 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 7:46 in the morning. Inside the Russian cockpit, Volkov was experiencing the same isolation. His long-range communication suite was fried. The encrypted link to Severomorsk was a wall of white noise. He looked at his co-pilot. The man was staring at his hands. They were shaking. Volkov looked back at the F-35. He saw Sarah Miller look toward him. For a moment, the geopolitical boundaries of the Cold War vanished. They were just 2 human beings suspended, 6 miles above a freezing ocean, trapped in a bubble of electronic silence. Volkov realized the missile had not malfunctioned. It had been intercepted by something that did not want a war to start. The detonation was a surgical strike against their technology, not their lives. He looked down at the ocean. The clouds had parted. The water below was perfectly still. There was no debris from the missile, no smoke, no fire. The weapon had simply ceased to exist. He reached out and tapped the glass of his altimeter. It was spinning in circles. The laws of physics in this square mile of airspace were no longer functioning. He looked at the American pilot and raised a single hand. He was not sure if she could see him through the glare. The silence was absolute. It was the heaviest thing Sarah had ever felt. She checked her compass. It was pointing south, then west, then north. It was searching for a pole that was no longer there. The crisis had reached its peak. The world was balanced on the head of a pin. 7:47 in the morning. The Combined Air Operations Center. The main display was a void. General Thorne gripped the edge of the console. His knuckles were white. "Status," he barked. The technician did not look up. "Nothing, sir. No radar. No satellite. No voice. The entire sector is a dead zone." Thorne looked at the clock. "The Russians will see this as a total wipe. They will think we used a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. They will think the war has started." The technician finally looked at him. "Sir, the Russians are not responding to the hotline. The link is dark." Thorne reached for the secure phone to the White House. The line was dead. Every backup had failed. The silence was the loudest sound he had ever heard. 7:47 and 30 seconds in the morning. 7:47 and 30 seconds in the morning. Murmansk. The Russian automated defense system was called Perimeter. It was designed to function when the commanders were dead. It felt the loss of the Tupolev. It calculated the probability of a first strike. The number was 99%. The system did not hesitate. It bypassed the human operators. The silos in the tundra began to vent. Massive steel doors slid back. Ice fell into the dark pits. The missiles were armed. The warheads were warm. The Russian commander stared at the automated sequence. He tried to type the abort code. The keyboard was unresponsive. The screen showed a countdown. 2 minutes. 1 minute 59. He sat back in his chair. He closed his eyes. 7:48 in the morning. High above the Barents Sea. The air inside Sarah's cockpit began to shimmer. The heartbeat in her headset stopped. It was replaced by a digital pulse. Her standby display began to scroll. Thousands of lines of code. It was a total rewrite of her flight system. The language was unknown. It was a sequence of mathematical constants, prime numbers, geometry. She looked at the Russian bomber. The white fuselage was glowing. A soft light was bleeding from the seams of the metal. It was not a fire. It was an energy field. Major Volkov felt the same pressure. His hands were frozen on the yoke. He felt a calm weight on his chest. He looked at his co-pilot. The man was unconscious. The bomber began to climb. It was not using its engines. It was being pulled. An invisible thread. Volkov saw the F-35. It was rising with him. They were moving together. 40,000 feet, 50,000. The sky was turning black. The stars were visible in the middle of the day. Sarah looked at her fuel gauge. The numbers were increasing. The tanks were filling with something impossible. The oxygen in her mask tasted like the forest. The fear left her. A strange clarity took its place. She was no longer a pilot. She was a witness. The two aircraft reached 70,000 feet. They leveled off. The earth below was a silent curve. The sun was a white eye in the void. 7:49 in the morning. The edge of space. The sky at 70,000 feet was a deep and bruised purple. Below them, the curve of the earth was visible. It was a fragile blue line against the infinite dark. Captain Sarah Miller looked out of her canopy. The Russian bomber was still positioned off her wing. Both aircraft were ascending at a rate that should have caused their engines to stall. There was no vibration. There was no sound of rushing air. Suddenly, the space between the two aircraft began to ripple. It looked like heat rising from a desert road. A distortion appeared. It was a perfect sphere of refracted light, approximately 100 meters in diameter. It was not a machine. It was not a cloud. It was a lens. Sarah watched as the stars behind the sphere shifted and bent. The laws of gravity seemed to lose their grip. Sarah spoke into her mask. Her voice was a whisper. "Control. I am seeing a visual anomaly. It is between us. It is pulling the light." There was no response from the radio, only a soft, melodic chime that played in her headset. It was a sequence of 5 notes. They were pure, they were ancient. 7:49 and 30 seconds in the morning. Inside the Russian bomber, Major Viktor Volkov watched the sphere. His co-pilot was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady. Volkov felt a strange sense of peace. He was a man of science and steel. He did not believe in ghosts, but he could not deny what he was seeing. The sphere was expanding. As it grew, the white paint on his bomber began to glow with a soft, bioluminescent green. The sphere pulsed once. The distortion reached out and touched the wing of the Tupolev. Volkov felt a sensation of profound weightlessness. For a second, he was not in a cockpit. He was nowhere. He saw a flash of images, a forest, a city he did not recognize, a map of the stars that was entirely wrong. Then, he was back. He looked at the American fighter. The F-35 was being pushed away. It was not a violent movement. It was as if the two aircraft were magnets with the same polarity. They were being separated by a force that was firm and absolute. The gap between them grew from 100 meters to 10 miles in the blink of an eye. 7:50 in the morning, global command centers. In an instant, the world came back. In the bunker at Uedem, the radar screens flickered and cleared. The red icons for the F-35 and the Tupolev reappeared, but they were no longer in the same place. They were 50 miles apart. They were both descending rapidly toward 30,000 feet. General Thorne stared at the board. They are back. Get me a voice link. Now. The technician scrambled. Sir, the Russian missile silos in Murmansk. They just went offline. The entire automated network has been hard reset. The countdown is gone. Thorne did not cheer. He did not exhale. He looked at the satellite feed. What about the pilots? 7:51 in the morning. Sarah Miller felt the heavy hand of gravity return. Her F-35 dropped through 80,000 feet. Her engines roared back to life, with a deafening howl. Her displays turned from black to green. The navigation system screamed at her. She was in a steep dive. She grabbed the stick. It was her own again. She pulled the nose up, feeling the G-force crush her into the seat. She leveled off at 32,000 feet. She was alone in the sky. The Russian bomber was a tiny speck on her long-range radar. It was heading east. It was heading home. Sarah keyed her radio. Control. This is Valkyrie 1-1. I am back in the green. I have the target on radar. He is disengaging, requesting instructions. The voice of the controller was shaking. Valkyrie 1-1. This is Control. Stand by. We are trying to understand what just happened. Are you okay? Sarah looked up at the purple sky. I am fine, she said. But the missile is gone. Everything is gone. The pivot had occurred. The war had been stopped by a hand that did not belong to any nation. 7:55 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. Captain Sarah Miller leveled her F-35 at 28,000 feet. The world outside looked normal. The sun was a pale yellow disk. The ocean was a deep and restless gray. But inside her cockpit, the laws of reality were still struggling to reassert themselves. She looked at her fuel display. It was a digital impossibility. When the intercept began, she had 60% of her internal fuel remaining. Now, the gauge read 100%. The tanks were full. Not a single pound of fuel had been consumed during the climb to the edge of space. Sarah keyed her radio. Her voice was steady but thin. Valkyrie 1-2. This is 1-1. Report your status. Do you have a visual on my position? There was a long pause. Then, the voice of her wingman came through. He sounded dazed. 1-1. This is 1-2. I have you in sight. I am 5 miles at your 7 o'clock. My systems just cycled back to life. I have no data from the last 3 minutes. My flight recorder is showing a gap, like someone cut the tape. Sarah gripped the flight stick. Copy. Join on me. We are returning to base. Do not arm your weapons. Do not even look at the master arm switch. 7:58 in the morning. Inside the Russian cockpit, Major Viktor Volkov watched his co-pilot groan and sit up. The man rubbed his eyes. Major, what happened? The light. I remember the blue light. Volkov did not look at him. He was staring at the fuel flow indicators. They were static. The 4 massive engines were pushing the bomber toward the Russian border. yet they were not burning a single drop of kerosene. He felt a cold shiver on his neck. He looked at the navigation map. The path of his flight had been corrected. The bomber was no longer on a heading for the Norwegian coast. It was on a direct, fuel-efficient track back to his home base. Volkov spoke into the radio. He was no longer using the emergency frequency. He was calling his command. Severomorsk. This is Bear 6-1. We are in the clear. We are returning to base. Be advised, the mission is terminated. We have experienced a catastrophic technical anomaly. The Russian controller did not ask for details. His voice was thick with relief. Bear 6-1. Understood. We have you on radar. The interceptors from Murmansk have been recalled. The silos are closed. Come home, Victor. Just come home. 8:02 in the morning. The Combined Air Operations Center. General Thorne stood in the center of the room. The silence had been replaced by a low, frantic murmur. Analysts were staring at their screens. They were looking at the telemetry from the F-35. One of them, a young lieutenant, stood up and walked over to the general. He was holding a tablet with a graph of the missile launch. The lieutenant spoke in a low voice. "Sir, we just got the final ping from the Meteor missile before it detonated. The internal temperature of the warhead was recorded as absolute zero, in the middle of an engine burn. It should have been hundreds of degrees, but the sensors registered it as the coldest point in the known universe." Thorne looked at the screen. "And the explosion? What was the yield?" "There was no yield, sir," the lieutenant replied. "The sensors detected a massive surge of information, not energy. It was a burst of compressed data, terabytes per second. It was like the missile was trying to speak to our computers before it vanished." 8:05 in the morning. The two NATO fighters turned south. The Russian bomber turned east. The gap between them widened until they were no longer on each other's radar. The immediate threat of a global conflict had evaporated. The missile had not killed anyone. It had not destroyed a city, but it had left a mark on everyone who saw it. Sarah Miller looked over her shoulder. The sky, where the sphere had appeared, was empty and blue. She felt a sudden, sharp sense of loss. It was as if she had been part of something grand and ancient. And now, she was being sent back to the small, violent world of men. The crisis had ended, but the analysis was just beginning. In the basements of intelligence agencies from Moscow to Washington, people were starting to look at the data. They were finding things that should not exist. 8:10 in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. Captain Sarah Miller felt the weight of the aircraft as she began her descent toward Evenes Air Base. The cockpit was no longer a high-tech sanctuary. It felt like a box of cold glass. She looked at her fuel display again. 100%. It had not moved in 20 minutes. Every law of thermodynamics was being violated right in front of her eyes. She felt a strange detachment from the world below. The fjords of Norway were rising to meet her, green and jagged and real. But the sky she had just left felt more significant. She keyed her radio for the final approach. Evenes Tower, Valkyrie 1-1, 5 miles out. Landing gear down and locked. Requesting immediate debrief and medical standby for my wingman. The tower controller sounded different. The usual professional clip was gone. Valkyrie 1-1. You are cleared to land on runway 01. Be advised. The base is under total security lockdown. There are black SUVs on the tarmac, Captain. They are not ours. Sarah tightened her grip on the stick. Copy. I see them. 8:15 in the morning. Above the coordinates of the detonation. A Pate Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft arrived at the center of the incident zone. It was a converted Boeing 737, packed with the most sensitive acoustic and electronic sensors in the NATO inventory. The crew began dropping sonar buoys into the dark water. They were looking for debris. They were looking for the remains of a multi-million-dollar missile that had vanished into a blue spark. The sensor operator stared at his screen. Commander, I have nothing. No surface oil. No metallic fragments on the magnetic anomaly detector. The water is perfectly clean. The commander leaned over his shoulder. Check the thermal layers. A detonation that bright should have left. A heat signature in the water for hours. That is the problem, sir, the operator replied. The water temperature at the surface has dropped by exactly 4 degrees Celsius in a perfect circle, 1 mile wide. It is as if someone dropped a massive block of dry ice into the ocean. But there is nothing there. 8:22 in the morning. Severomorsk, Russia. Major Viktor Volkov climbed down the ladder of his Tupolev 160. His boots hit the concrete of the runway with a heavy thud. He was met not by his ground crew, but by a line of men in long black coats. They were from the state security apparatus. They did not salute. They did not smile. One of them stepped forward and held out a hand for the flight data recorder. Volkov handed over the orange box. "The aircraft is fine," he said. "The mission was a success, if you count survival as a success." The official looked at the bomber. The white paint was still glowing with a faint, pulsing light that was only visible in the shadows of the hangar. "The General Staff is already reviewing the satellite telemetry, Major. They say the American missile turned back on its launcher. Is that true?" Volkov looked the man in the eye. "It did more than turn back. It was rewritten. It was not a weapon. By the time it reached the midpoint, it was a messenger." The official narrowed his eyes. "What was the message?" "That we are children playing with matches," Volkov said. He walked past the men toward the debriefing room. He did not look back. 8:30 in the morning. In the basement of the Pentagon, a room full of cryptographers stared at a single line of text. It had been recovered from the final data packet of the Meteor missile. The code was not binary. It was not hexadecimal. It was a string of prime numbers that mapped perfectly to the atomic weights of the elements in the human body. One of the analysts pushed his glasses up his nose. "Sir, this is not a malfunction. This is a sequence. It is a biological signature." The missile was used as a transmitter. It sent our own genetic code back to us. A general in the corner stood up. "Sent it back from where?" The analyst pointed to the screen. "From the point of detonation. The data did not go to the F-35. It went up. The signal was picked up by a satellite that does not belong to any nation. It was a relay." The mystery was no longer about a near miss over the Arctic. It was about who had been watching the fuse burn. The world was beginning to realize that the most advanced weapons in the human arsenal were nothing more than toys to the entity that had intervened. 9:15 in the morning. Evenes Air Base, Norway. The silence of the hangars was absolute. Captain Sarah Miller stood on the concrete floor, watching a team of men in dark, unmarked coveralls surround her F-35. They were not wearing Air Force patches. They carried specialized sensors that looked like silver wands. One man passed a device over the cockpit canopy. The needle on his gauge stayed in the red zone. The aircraft was emitting a frequency that hummed just below the range of human hearing. It was a sound that felt like a vibration in the teeth. A man with a gray suit and a clipboard approached her. He did not introduce himself. "Captain Miller. We have finished the initial download of your flight data recorder. There is a problem." Sarah pulled her flight gloves off. Her hands were finally still. "What kind of problem?" The man looked at the jet. "The recorder shows the missile was launched, but it does not show a target. According to the digital logs, the sky was empty. There was no Russian bomber. There was no missile reversal. The computer recorded 3 minutes of absolute nothing." Sarah looked at the man. "I saw it. My wingman saw it. The Russian pilot saw it. We were at 70,000 feet with our engines at idle." The man nodded slowly. "The hardware says you never left 30,000 feet. But your fuel tanks are full. Your oxygen system has been replenished with a gas we cannot identify. Whatever happened up there did not happen to the machine. It happened to you." 9:45 in the morning. A secure facility near Murmansk. Major Viktor Volkov sat in a room with no windows. A single light hung from the ceiling. Across from him sat an officer from the main intelligence directorate. The man was holding a piece of debris. It was a small, scorched component from the Tupolev's navigation array. "Explain this, Major," the officer said. Volkov leaned forward. "It is a circuit board. Or, it was. It is fused," the officer replied. "The gold traces have been rearranged. into a geometric pattern. Our engineers spent the last hour looking at it under a microscope. It is not a circuit anymore. It is a map. It shows a star system that is 400 light-years from here. Volkov rubbed his face. The missile did not hit us. It taught us. It rewrote our systems to show us how small the sky really is. The officer slammed a component on the table. This is a security breach of the highest order. If the Americans have this technology, they do not, Volkov interrupted. I saw the face of the American pilot. She was as terrified as I was. This was not a weapon. It was a shutdown. 10:15 in the morning, the White House and the Kremlin. The secure line between Washington and Moscow chattered to life. It was the first time the hotline had been used for a tactical incident in over a decade. The voice on the American side was calm. The voice on the Russian side was equally measured. There was no posturing. There were no threats. We have confirmed the status brevet of our aircraft, the American representative said. We are declaring a technical malfunction across the board. We are grounding the F-35 fleet for 24 hours. We are doing the same with our long-range aviation, the Russian responded. Our sensors recorded the same anomaly. We are in agreement that neither side initiated the engagement. A long pause followed, the sound of a world breathing again. Then what was it? The American asked. The Russian voice was quiet. Our analysts are calling it a kinetic intervention. Someone turned off the lights before we could burn the house down. We are lucky we still have a house to live in. The crisis had fully resolved. The jets were in their hangars. The missiles were back in their bays. There were no medals for this mission. There were no press releases. Both nations began a silent, desperate race to understand the technology that had stopped them. They were no longer looking at each other across the border. They were looking up. 3 days later, the Pentagon and the Kremlin. The world remained unaware of how close the clock had come to midnight. On the surface, the geopolitical tension between the East and the West continued its usual, predictable rhythm. Diplomatic cables were exchanged. Press secretaries gave brief statements about routine maritime exercises. But behind the reinforced concrete of the world's most secure rooms, a silent revolution was taking place. For the first time since the end of the Second World War, Russian and American scientists were sharing raw telemetry data. In a windowless room in Virginia, General Thorne sat across from a digital link to Moscow. On the screen was a high-resolution scan of the fused circuit board from the Russian bomber. Beside it was the data packet recovered from the American F-35. The two patterns were identical. They were not just maps of the stars, they were a set of instructions. Thorne spoke to the lead cryptographer. Tell me exactly what we are looking at. Use plain English. The analyst pointed to the screen. Sir, it is a hardware-level lock. Every F-35 in the European theater and every Russian strategic bomber in the Northern Fleet has been tagged. It is like a digital brand. If either side attempts to arm a nuclear-tipped weapon within 500 miles of the Arctic Circle, the systems will simply cease to function. The code we found is a dead man's switch, but it was not put there by us. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The United Nations headquarters, New York. A private meeting was held in a basement room that did not appear on any floor plan. There were only 5 people in the room. They represented the permanent members of the Security Council. They did not have staff. They did not have recording devices. They sat in a circle of heavy leather chairs. The representative from France broke the silence. The reports from the Barents Sea incident are consistent. The kinetic intervention was precise. It was non-lethal. And it was technologically superior to anything in our combined inventories. We are no longer discussing a pure state adversary. We are discussing a containment strategy. The Russian representative nodded. Our military analysis is complete. It demonstrated total control over our most advanced command and control networks. It moved 2 80-ton aircraft to the stratosphere without using combustion. It refilled their fuel tanks with a stabilized liquid hydrogen that we cannot replicate. The American representative leaned forward. The message is clear. The Arctic is being closed to kinetic conflict. We are being told that our toys are dangerous, and that someone is willing to take them away if we do not play fair. 5:30 in the afternoon. A military hospital in Oslo. Captain Sarah Miller sat on the edge of her bed. She had been through 48 hours of psychological evaluation. The doctors said she was suffering from high-altitude hypoxia and acute stress. They told her the memories of the blue light and the purple sky were hallucinations. But Sarah knew better. She looked at her hands. They were still stained with the faint, bioluminescent glow that had washed over her cockpit. It did not wash off. It did not fade. There was a knock on the door. A man in a plain suit entered. He handed her a small, encrypted tablet. "Captain, there is someone who wants to speak with you. It is a secure patch from a facility in Russia." Sarah took the tablet. The screen flickered to life. She saw the face of Major Viktor Volkov. He was sitting in a similar room, hundreds of miles away. He looked tired. He looked older. Volkov spoke in English. "Captain, they are telling you that you are crazy." "Yes." Sarah nodded. "They are. They say the data does not exist." Volkov smiled sadly. "The data is in our marrow now. We were the first to see the boundary. The world is much larger than our borders. I think we are the only two people who know how lucky we are to be alive." Sarah looked at the glow on her skin. "Why did they let us go, Victor?" "Because a message needs a witness," Volkov replied, "and a witness needs a voice." The political fallout was a quiet terror. The military analysis was a confession of helplessness. The two greatest powers on Earth had been neutralized by a single missile that chose not to hit its target. The strategic balance of the world had not shifted to the left or the right. It had been pulled upward. 10 in the morning, 5 days after the encounter. The Barents Sea is quiet. The clouds have returned to hide the dark water. But the world above the clouds has changed forever. In the laboratories of the great powers, the silence is heavy. The stabilized liquid hydrogen found in the tanks of the F-35 and the Tu-160 remains a mystery. It is a substance that should not exist at room temperature. It is a signature. It is a message that says our understanding of physics is incomplete. Our most advanced machines are nothing more than steam engines in the eyes of the entity that intercepted them. Strategic analysts have given the event a formal name. They call it the Arctic anomaly. But in the classified briefings, they use a different term. They call it the intervention. For decades, the theory of nuclear deterrence was based on the second mating idea of mutual assured destruction. That theory died 3 days ago. It was replaced by something far more humbling: mutual assured neutralization. The military intelligence communities of two continents have reached a terrifying conclusion. Our most sophisticated weapons are no longer under our total control. The missile that turned back on its launcher did not malfunction. It was co-opted. The digital heartbeat that Captain Sarah Miller heard in her headset was a handshake. It was a link between our primitive technology and something vastly more advanced. The string of prime numbers recovered from the data packet has been verified by mathematicians in 3 different countries. It is a biological map of a human being. It was a way for the observers to tell us that they know exactly what we are. They know our biology, they know our chemistry, and they know our capacity for self-destruction. Major Viktor Volkov and Captain Sarah Miller will never fly combat missions again. They have been reassigned to deep cover research roles. They are being kept in separate facilities. They are being asked the same questions over and over. They are being told that their memories are the result of a collective technological hallucination. But they are not alone. They have the memory of the purple sky. They have the memory of the sphere that bent the light of the distant stars. They are the only 2 people on the planet who truly understand the new rules of engagement. War has always been a game of numbers: altitude, speed, bearing, yield. But those numbers no longer matter if the board can be wiped clean at any moment. The Arctic is now a silent sanctuary. No missiles will fly there for a long time. No bombers will test the line. Every commander now knows that. There is a limit to their power. There is a ceiling that cannot be breached. The gate is being watched. The final report on the incident was printed in a single copy. It was read by the heads of state, and then placed into a vault that requires 3 separate keys to open. The conclusion of the report was not a military strategy. It was a philosophical warning. It stated that the terminal U-turn was not a defensive maneuver. It was a demonstration of ownership. The sky does not belong to the air forces of men. It belongs to whatever is capable of stopping a 4,000-mile-per-hour missile with a thought. The morning sun rises over the Norwegian fjords. It is a normal day. People go to work. They buy coffee. They look at the sky and see nothing but a deep and empty blue. But high above, in the thin air where the black of space begins, the ghost of a blue spark remains. It is a reminder. We are not the masters of the storm. We are only the children who live beneath it. And for now, the storm has been stayed. The sky is clear. The world is at peace, not because we chose it, but because we were forced to accept it. It is a fragile peace. It is a quiet peace. But for a world that was seconds away from a nuclear winter, it is enough. We are being given a second chance to learn how to live on the ground before we try to claim the stars.